In today's video, we're taking a look at the latest trade talk from around the NHL. Is the Edmonton Oilers interested in Patrick Kane? We'll discuss that possible scenario. Could Brock Boeser end up back home in the state of Minnesota? Plus, is Ivan Provorov and the Philadelphia Flyers heading forward to force? There's some new interesting information out on him today. Plus, we have a lot of updates around some junior prospect players that are going to be impact players in the NHL. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to talk about here today. Lots of trade rumors surfacing today from the 32 Thoughts podcast and some other sources as well, which we'll get into in just a moment. First up, a couple updates on some prospects and some junior age players. The Winnipeg Jets have assigned a couple of their top prospects back to junior after competing in the World Junior Championships. As suspected, and I mentioned a few days back, Brad Lambert, their first round pick from last year's draft, is heading back to junior. Of course, he was eligible to play in the American Hockey League. Of course, Lambert was, he's got one parent that's Canadian, one that's Finnish, from Finland. So he's been playing in Finland. Technically, he's drafted from there. So he is considered a European player from that perspective. So he was eligible to play in the American Hockey League, which he did some, played in the World Juniors. And now they feel it's best for him to go back and compete with the Western Hockey League's Seattle Thunderbirds, who has a really strong team, and they have his rights, so that certainly makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, for him to go and continue developing. And they've also taken American-born player Chaz Lucius, also a high first-round pick of theirs recently, who had a real solid tournament, probably arguably the best player for Team USA at the World Juniors. He's been assigned to the Western Hockey League as well, except his rights are owned by the Portland Winterhawks. So obviously Lucius started playing college hockey, signed his pro contract. He's had some time in the American Hockey League as well, and now he goes to junior. So it should be an opportunity for both these players to have a big role and really dominate like we've seen some of the other prospects do, which is hopefully going to be good for their long-term development. Of course, Shane Wright, the top prospect for the Seattle Kraken, the number 4 pick in the 2022 NHL draft. We know he was recently sent back to the Ontario Hockey League, where his junior team was the Kingston Frontenacs. As I mentioned, he was sent back with the expectation that he was going to be traded and heading to a new team, so he'd have a chance to be more competitive and likely have a shot at an OHL Championship, Memorial Cup, and like a deep playoff run. Right now, yesterday, I was talking about how it was looking like he was going to the London Knights. Now today, I don't know if this is official as of yet. I'm trying to find confirmed reports as I record this. If I have been able to confirm it afterwards before it gets posted on YouTube, check the pinned comment down below. But right now, indications are he's heading to the Windsor Spitfires for a real solid young player and a plethora of picks. Could be a good spot for him. They also have a real good team as well. Of course, head coach there is Mark Savard, former NHL player. Be a great coach for Shane Wright to work with. So that's also a really good opportunity for him as well. The number of Ontario Hockey League teams that were interested will all be good in various aspects for Shane. So I think this is going to be something that likely goes down and should be a good fit for him. In Montreal, we saw the news earlier that they, on an emergency basis, recalled prospect goaltender Caden Primo. Apparently, Jake Allen has suffered an upper body injury and is considered day-to-day. So he will be out for a little bit while Primo gets the recall. I believe Samuel Montembeault was expected to start tonight's game against the Kraken. On to some other news regarding a prospect, the Buffalo Sabres. One of their top goalie prospects, Erik Portillo, who's a Swedish prospect playing in the NCAA. Jeff Merrick of Sportsnet's reporting that it's not looking good for them to be able to sign him to a pro contract, that he's likely going to want to go elsewhere. And of course, when it comes to college hockey players, they can continue to play college hockey. They can't sign an entry-level contract until they are ready to turn pro. It's prohibited against NCAA rules, right? So with the prospect goalies already in the system for the Sabres, obviously they have UPL, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. They have Devin Levi in the system as well. Levi right now looks like he might have the potential highest ceiling, best chance as a goalie of the future type of player, but that's still, of course, the projection today. That could always change. Portillo, another drafted goalie, having a pretty he looks like he could be really good too, but based on my assumption here is that based on the number of goalies in their system, he wants to go elsewhere for more opportunity, but that's just, like I said, that's just an opinion of mine. Don't know his exact reasonings, but Merrick's usually got a really good pulse on the junior scene. So when he's reporting that Portillo is very unlikely to sign in Buffalo, I think that's a very good source of information. So there's a good chance he either goes to UFA and goes and becomes a free agent after his season's over, or the other possibility is the Sabres might work with him and his agent to maybe find where it might be a more suitable place to try to trade him, see if they can get something in return. Like we even seen this happen with Adam Fox, who kind of forced his way to the New York Rangers. They didn't get a lot in return. And the Hurricanes, I believe it was, had him. He was originally drafted by the Flames. He didn't want to sign there. They moved him, and of course, in that big trade we saw a number of years ago between the Hurricanes and the Flames, which had like Lindholm and Dougie Hamilton, a whole bunch of players going back and forth. It's like a 4 or 5 player deal. Fox was one of the pieces included going to the Hurricanes, and then he wouldn't sign there either. He essentially forced his way by staying in college longer to where he wanted to go. I think they only got like a second round pick or something like that for him, and he signed with the Rangers. So we'll see where things go on Portillo. On to the trade section of the video. We have lots to talk about here today. I want to talk about Patrick Kane, Brock Boeser, and Ivan Provorov. Starting with Patrick Kane, we got some updates from Elliotte Friedman and some thoughts as well from Dave Pagnotta of the fourthperiod.com. Now, Dave Pagnotta is reporting that he believes the Edmonton Oilers have a very keen interest in Patrick Kane and would be very interested in possibly acquiring his services near the NHL trade deadline, but it would be complicated, of course. The Hawks would have to retain 50% of his salary. They might even need a third team to work as like a broker, so to speak, and kind of retain some more salary to make it work, which means they'd have to pay something to that team for that as well. And it could get expensive and might prove to be very difficult, but the interest is legit according to him and very real. Obviously, the Oilers are going to want to do other things too. The Oilers, I don't see them wanting to go into the deadline without wanting to add on the blue line. That's certainly a bigger area of concern and focus. I know Elliotte Friedman had reported before that before they make a move on the blue line, they kind of want to see what they have in Philip Broberg, give him a chance to hopefully play a little bit more because they feel like they want to see if they have the solution internally before they go externally and spend assets and make another move here that could impact the playing time of Broberg down the line, depending on who they bring in, if he has term or whatnot, right? So certainly an area that they want to address as well, but Patrick Kane would be, can you imagine like him in Edmonton? You throw in McDavid and Draisaitl and Evander Kane and Nugent Hopkins. Add Kane to that would be an insane top 6. But to me, as much as that would be awesome, and they still need to look at their goaltending and the defense. I'm not entirely convinced that as much as it would be a crazy top 6 and it would be like almost like playing like a video game, like a type of roster. Are they still capable of going deeper into playoffs? I don't know. But like I said, they have other issues to worry about there. Now, the other information from Friedman on Kane is that he's not entirely convinced right now that Kane gets moved this year, and here's why. We know right now that Patrick Kane is dealing with an injury, but we don't know the exact nature or severity of it. What Friedman's been told is that the injury is something that he's been playing through, and he's decided that basically we're at a point in the season that there's no point in pushing it anymore. The Hawks are well down the standings, well out of the playoffs. That's not happening. So he needs to take some time and get himself healthy. Of course, this would come for a variety of reasons. It's either looking like A, he wants to get healthy enough so that he can be a tradable asset for the Hawks at the deadline. That is some people's point of view, and that could be the case. Also the possibility, like Friedman said, what if the injury is more serious and he ends up longer term? That might cause problems for getting traded, and it might kind of either shy away teams from their interest, or it could also be a case where Kane ends up shutting himself down for the season and say, listen, the Hawks, there's no point in me playing. They're going nowheres right now. I need to get something cleaned up because it sounds like whatever it is might need to have a surgery, but without knowing more details, it's hard to know what kind of recovery time and all that. It's still kind of secretive and speculative, so it's difficult to nail it down. But at the same time, Friedman also says that if that were the case and for some reason Kane couldn't play and couldn't be a tradable asset, he feels there's a possibility that they might agree to a 1-year contract extension and have Patrick Kane come back next year and kind of go through this all over again and maybe trade him next year at the deadline. So that's a possibility. But at the end of the day, it kind of really boils down to to the injury. We don't know enough about the injury and his return time or what he's dealing with to really make a proper assessment or judgment call on it. All we know for today is that the injury could have an impact on it being traded, and according to Pagnotta, the Oilers have serious legitimate interest, and we'll see if they pursue it based on how his injury heals up or how that goes. Now, there's also reports about Brock Boeser. Of course, we know he's one of the many names in Vancouver that are expected to be traded sometime between now and the deadline. We know that it's been confirmed by different sources that Brock Boeser's agent has been given permission from the team and their management group to kind of source out their own trade. They've got permission to speak to other teams to find a deal that works for them, that he would be willing to do, and then they can sort out the trade return. So it's no secret, Boeser very, very likely going to be traded sometime between now and the deadline. Now, there is always a slim chance it could hold off and be done in the offseason, but I'm sure he's a player that will have enough interest from around the league that I think there's a good chance it gets done before the cutoff. Now, of course, one of the many teams that have been rumored about being interested in Boeser forever, this is like one of the worst kept secrets, is his home state, the Minnesota Wild. Of course, I'm sure he'd have no problem going to Minnesota and being closer to home. At least you wouldn't think so. Now, of course, Minnesota likely wouldn't be shocked if they were interested to add a player of his caliber as a deadline acquisition. Now, the only thing is do they have the right assets to really intrigue Vancouver to want to pull the trigger on that kind of deal? We know Brock Boeser's not overly old. He's still in that mid-20s range. Obviously, a relatively proven goal scorer who's had recent struggles, but the whole team has. So it's hard to say how much of that's on him. Certainly some of it for sure. But what would Vancouver want for Brock Boeser from Minnesota? It's a questionable call. I think they'd probably want an interesting young player back, like maybe somebody that's not like super newly drafted. I'm thinking they're going to probably want a player who's young, has good potential, but at least has some pro experience. At least that would be my judgment call. And I think they'd probably even be open to that player being a solid defenseman, because they need to rejig their top 4D. There's no doubt about that. They also could use some, obviously some retooling in the forward group, but at the same time, they do have a lot of other strong forwards, so getting a D in return is not out of the question. I don't know if Matt Dumba is somebody that they would want to have interest in. Certainly Dumba's going to need a new contract. Whether or not they see him as a longer-term fit with the club, and if they could agree on an extension, there's a lot of moving parts there that would probably have to be ironed out and discussed. I don't know if that's something we would see, but I do know his name has come up before. He's likely not going to be a Minnesota Wild player beyond this season, so it might be something that works out. I just don't know that that's going to be the return that Vancouver really wants in this kind of a trade, but maybe we'll have to wait and see. And lastly, is the Flyers and Ivan Provorov heading for a divorce? Headlines were made today from the 32 Thoughts podcast from Jeff Merrick and Elliot Friedman, talking at great length about Ivan Provorov, and then that was followed up with Crossing Broad and Philly beat reporter Anthony Sanfilippo, who's got a great amount of sources with the Flyers, a great resource for any Flyers news. He quite often breaks a lot of stories regarding the Flyers organization. Very credible player, very credible source in the media in that sense. Of course, also has a pretty decent podcast if you're interested in listening to a lot of hockey podcasts. It's called Snow the Goalie. Of course, the former NHL defenseman Chris Terry takes part in that, as well as Rush Joy and Anthony Sanfilippo. It's a pretty good listen if you want to check it out. But the general consensus here is that it's time for a change with Provorov and the Flyers, and it's kind of mutual based on the reports that we're getting from both these two great sources. Now, one thing that I wasn't aware, I knew that it's not the first time that Provorov has been mentioned in the rumor mill about possibly being traded. Now it seems like it's not only something that they would consider, but more of a case of the team and the player are both starting to feel like it's time and they would welcome it. I mean, that's not the exact wording, but we're basically heading down that road based on these reports. But one thing I wasn't aware, but Anthony had in his article on Crossing Broad, is that 2 years ago, the Winnipeg Jets had discussed trade with the Philadelphia Flyers when they were looking to find a new home for Patrick Laine, and they offered him straight up 1-for-1 to the Flyers for Ivan Provorov, and Chuck Fletcher and the Flyers said, no, thank you. At this point in Provorov's career, there's no way they're going to get a potential return of a player of Laine's caliber. Now, has Laine gone on to Columbus and be a huge goal scorer and absolutely light it up the way that he once did in Winnipeg as a 40-goal man? No, not quite. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. The team has struggled, but still, Provorov for Laine at the time, I think would have been a good deal. But I guess the rationale was they didn't want to give up on Provorov too young, see him flourish somewhere else, and be that number one defenseman that they thought he could be. Because at one point he really showed the first couple of years of his career, it looked like they had a stud number one. Things didn't continue that path. Now he seems like more like a potential second pair or number 2-3 is more what he's suited for. And, he's been taken off the power play a lot. It's just not going the way things are going for him. It's just time for a change, essentially. So basically what Elliotte Friedman's reporting is that it's mutual, though. The team is frustrated with his development and how he's played, and he's frustrated with all the losing and the way the direction of the team, essentially. And it's getting to that point where he has not asked for a trade. That was not mentioned, but it sounds like it's getting close to that. Now, Anthony's article expanded a bit on what Elliotte Friedman was talking about on the podcast today, basically saying that, it's just a lot of it's getting to him and just time for a change. Now, where could he possibly go? I know Jeff Merrick made mention on the podcast that Winnipeg would be a perfect destination. Of course, they tried to trade for him before, Cheveldayoff offering Laine for Provorov, so it doesn't mean that they'd still have interest today. But the thing that they felt would be great for Provorov, and this is just a theory, this does not mean that they're having conversations or that the trade will happen, but Rick Bowness is kind of looked upon by some, and they've kind of dubbed him what they call the defense whisperer. He's had a lot of great success with younger defensemen and really molding them and helping them take big leaps and bounds and steps in their career. He was absolutely huge for Victor Hedman in Tampa. He was an assistant coach there for quite a stretch. And when Hedman was young in his career, it really helped mold him to be the defenseman he is today. Of course, he also went on to work in Dallas as an assistant and then head coach. Had a really positive impact on like a Miro Haskinen. Since he's arrived in Winnipeg, he's completely helped Josh Morrissey kind of rebrand and remold himself. Like Morrissey, I was convinced up until last year that Josh Morrissey, I always thought he was a really good defenseman. I just wasn't convinced he was a number one. Kind of similar to Provorov. I really thought maybe he's more of a 2-3 guy, and they need to bring in another stud guy to kind of be even better than him. And if they find maybe because where he's a left-handed shot, if they could bring in a right-hander who's capable of being a number one, and he could be like the number two, and they could form a top pair, maybe that'd be better for him. A little less pressure, but you know what? He's shown now this year between the defensive numbers, his defensive analytics, and the offense he's putting up that he can be a number one. Bowness, you say what you want about Rick Bowness. He's had a long, long, long career all around the league, but he has been known for having, I think one of his biggest accomplishments might be the impact on young defensemen. So anyways, and the other thing too with Winnipeg is that Ivan Provorov played some junior hockey in the WHL for the Brandon Wheat Kings. So certainly very familiar with the province of Manitoba. Maybe he might not be opposed to going back there. Now, I guess the other name that Merrick mentioned that he kind of associates with Provorov was Kelly McCrimmon, of course, the GM in Vegas, because of his stint in Brandon. Of course, at one point, Kelly McCrimmon was the owner, GM, and coach of the Brandon Wheat Kings and was a huge part of Ivan Provorov's career when he was at the junior level, helping him become, that highly touted prospect that became a pretty high draft pick for the Philadelphia Flyers when he was in junior. So not to say that the Vegas Golden Knights are interested or that the Winnipeg Jets are interested, but those were the teams they mentioned that have connections to him on a different level that would probably be good for him in some other senses, a source of familiarity that he could draw on to hopefully get himself back on track. So we will see where things go, but the fact of the matter is there doesn't appear to be anything imminent right now when it comes to Provorov leaving Philly, but it sounds like the team and the player pretty well agree that it's time, and it's likely is going to happen sooner than later. If it doesn't happen by the deadline, I'd expect it to happen in the offseason, but Provorov's time in Philly likely coming up to a close here. very soon. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's rumors and the news we talked about earlier. Do you see Patrick Kane going to Edmonton? Is Brock Boeser make sense in Minnesota? And where could Ivan Provorov be? Do you think we'll see a divorce in the near future with the Flyers? Let me know your thoughts on all of that and more down in the comments. We'll talk about it further. If you're new to this channel, of course, make sure you subscribe. Stick around. I'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.